Good evening, Dominique Schwartz with ABC News. Firefighters in New South Wales are tonight trying to contain a blaze burning in Moreton National Park on the south coast. The Princes Highway has been reopened, but only vehicles with a police escort are being allowed through the area. While some local residents are returning to their homes tonight, they've been told to keep their bags packed.
The pilots who flew into this firestorm say it was like flying into the jaws of hell. For hours, 3 helicopters beat back the flames from the air. They were flying blind in smoke so thick, day became night. As the fire raced right down to the edge of the sand in places, 2,500 people fled.
We're about one street away from the wall of flames that's apparently there now.
Some went to the beach, their only haven. Some decided to stay and fight, garden hoses their only weapon. This was worse than last week, the fire described as like nothing seen before. At the Sussex Inlet RSL, hundreds crowded in for yet another uncertain night.
Third time in a week. I swept overnight here last week, or 3 days ago.
But all that was lost in the end was a vehicle and a shed. When conditions eased last night, the local people and holidaymakers from Cudmera and Barara were allowed to go home.
People that wish to go back to their house at either suburb are allowed to go back.
With Elvis by his side, Bob Carr came to see this hotspot firsthand, and he was quick to reject criticism that his new laws covering teenage arsonists were too harsh.
It is not possible to come out into a field like this and light a fire in these weather conditions and have it regarded as a prank. It's not possible.
Today, the aerial bombardment continued around property, but almost by guesswork and instinct in the smoke. For the south coast, this is about as clear as it's been for the past fortnight. The wind changes direction slightly, and just when you think there's nothing left to burn, the fire races away again.
It is not uncommon, I might say, for subsurface fire to linger for anything up to 3 or 4 weeks. That is, the roots of trees continue to burn.
The 2 new air cranes got their bearings in Sydney before being deployed against the state's fires. And they'll be needed. The forecast is again for rising temperatures and strong winds heading into the weekend. No one believes this fire crisis is over. Jeff Sims, ABC News, Sussex Inlet.
Meanwhile, 400 firefighters from Victoria and South Australia are being stood down as the bushfire crisis in New South Wales eases somewhat. They were given a special thank you today, the chance to see Sydney's better side, courtesy of a harbour cruise. But some firefighters are concerned they're leaving a job not quite finished.
Some of these boys that have come up here are a little bit disappointed that they aren't allowed to stay on and really get the fires right out.
More than 2,000 interstate volunteers have been working around the clock since the crisis began at Christmas.
We're looking forward to going home to our families, but missing what New South Wales has done for us.
Firefighters from Queensland and Tasmania are also expected to return home within the week, but all states have indicated their willingness to return if conditions worsen. The Immigration Minister has told the United Nations Refugee Agency that Australia has no special obligation to the asylum seekers on Nauru. Philip Ruddock says the international community should accept its share of the burden.
The Immigration Minister, Philip Ruddock, has left the United Nations in no doubt Australia feels it is doing its fair share for refugees. Today he called in the UNHCR's regional representative, rebuking him for saying Australia has a special responsibility to accept the 1,100 asylum seekers on Nauru if other countries refuse.
What we don't want is people taking the view that it's all too hard to ask other countries to assume some of the burden, and you can simply, hand pass it to Australia because, we've always been the good boys on the block.
The UNHCR had expected to rule on the refugee claims of hundreds of Iraqis on Nauru within a week. But today the federal government said that timeline was artificial and wouldn't be met.
That process has not been concluded, and it's inappropriate to speculate as to what it might be.
The UNHCR has also been told Australia won't announce how many refugees it will take until all other potential resettlement options have been exhausted.
We don't agree on everything, but we have good support from Australia, and I think we have a transparent relationship, and when we have things to say to each other, we do so.
The asylum seekers in Papua New Guinea and Nauru are likely to be there for several more months. Mr Ruddock says the fall of the Taliban has made it particularly difficult to assess the claims of Afghan asylum seekers who were claiming persecution. Gillian Bradford, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia has a new role in the campaign against terrorism, heading the international force controlling sanctions against Iraq.
It's been 3 months since Australian troops were deployed in the campaign against terrorism, but there's still been no direct engagement with the enemy. Instead, Australia has been assigned a new task, heading the international force controlling sanctions on Iraq, taking over from the United States. The decision was formalised on the weekend, freeing up US personnel for other military operations. Under Australia's command are British, American and Canadian troops. The main role for Kanimbla, HMAS Adelaide and Sydney is to stop oil and other materials being smuggled out of the Persian Gulf. And already they've been faced with their first operation.
2 sanctions violators were boarded by coalition forces, including HMAS Adelaide, and 1 gave up the attempt and turned back to Iraq.
But Australia's new defence role has angered the Islamic community. It argues sanctions are only driving the humanitarian crisis and any major involvement is not in Australia's best interest.
It is unwise because they are going to threaten any possible future trade with Australia, and they're going to lead to the death of more innocent civilians in Iraq who are suffering because of these sanctions.
HMAS Kanimbla is expected to return home by Easter, potentially an indication of how long Australia will lead this operation. Sarah Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
The British Prime Minister has made a lightning visit to Afghanistan to underline the international community's commitment to the war-ravaged nation. Mr Blair met with the Afghan leader Hamid Karzai.
There was little ceremony but much emotion as the new leader Hamid Karzai greeted the first world leader in memory to visit this shattered country. Tony Blair's message was that the war on terrorism was all but won.
The Taliban regime is gone, a hateful and oppressive regime. The Al-Qaeda terrorist network has certainly been destroyed.
Hours earlier, a more challenging visit to a country on the brink of war. India accuses Pakistan of backing Islamic terrorists in the disputed province of Kashmir. Tony Blair sought and won this condemnation.
Pakistan rejects terrorism in all its forms and manifestations and has fully cooperated with the international coalition against terrorism.
It's too early to tell if the talks have diffused the crisis between the 2 nuclear powers, but the Pakistan leader pledged to analyse a list of 20 terrorist suspects whom India claims Pakistan was harbouring. Tony Blair ended his whirlwind tour with a pledge that Britain would not abandon Afghanistan. With hundreds of British peacekeepers now in this volatile region, that pledge may be sorely tested in the months to come. Eric Campbell, ABC News, Kabul.
New Zealand's batsmen are chasing hard in their bid to reel in Australia A's imposing total in a limited overs tour match in Brisbane. Australia A scored briskly with Darren Lehmann hitting 50 in the home side's total of 5 for 282. A short time ago, New Zealand was 4 for 150 in reply.
A resurgent Ryan Campbell joined with hometown hero Jimmy Maher for an 88-run opening stand. Maher was also in good touch on his favourite pitch, helping to move the score along at 5 and over. New Zealand bowler Shane Bond was a casualty of the 38-degree heat and humidity, bowling just 4 overs before leaving the field. Greg Blewett maintained the slick scoring rate. He took a particular liking for the bowling of Vittori, lofting him over mid-on. Simon Caddick scored at just under a run a ball as Australia A moved past 200 for the loss of 3 wickets. But the Western Australian became the 4th batsman dismissed short of his half-century, caught brilliantly by Stephen Fleming. Darren Lehmann was subdued early but also adopted the adage that if you can't go through the field, go over it. He was the only one to reach 50 before being run out. Mike Hussey also got among the runs in the last 10 overs, Australia A amassing 5 for 282 off their 50 overs. New Zealand got the start it didn't want, losing both openers with just 26 on the board, Jason Gillespie trapping Lou Vincent in his opening spell. Craig McMillan and Stephen Fleming kept the Black Caps in the hunt with a productive 3rd wicket partnership. Chris Cairns was in a typically belligerent mood, hitting 2 sixes early in his innings, keeping alive New Zealand's hopes of victory. Ian Eckersley, ABC News, Brisbane.
And now a quick look at tomorrow's weather. An afternoon or evening storm is forecast for Darwin, a shower or two for Perth, becoming fine in Hobart and Melbourne and fine in the other capital cities. That's all from the National Newsroom this evening. Good night.